Hey everybody, how you doing? All right, so this is lesson 1 of our fantasy unit. I'm excited to get started. In this unit, the first thing that I want you to do, no matter where you are in the series, because I know some of you have seen the books and started on a little bit of them, and some of you haven't. Either way, I want you to go back to the beginning, and I want you to look at the front cover, the back cover. I want you to look at the table of contents and think about how it's organized. I want you to notice in the table of contents are the chapters titled, and if so, read those titles and see if you can make a visual. When I look at this book, the mentor text, The Thief of Always by Clive Barker, our mentor text, I notice right off the bat that there are titles to the chapters, and the first one is entitled Harvey Half Devoured. Well, I know devoured means eaten, but not like nicely nibbled on. Devoured is like when you shove something in your mouth because you're just so hungry. And half devoured means maybe half eaten. And Harvey is a name. So Harvey Half Devoured really creates an image for me. And that's only the title of the first chapter. So I want you to go through the chapter titles, even if you've already read it, and visualize it. Okay? Looking at the back cover, that will help you. Let me read you a bit. Mr. Hood's holiday house has stood for 1,000 years, welcoming countless children into its embrace. It's a place of miracles, a blissful round of treats and seasons, where every childish whim may be satisfied. There is a price to be paid, of course, but young Harvey Swick, bored with his life and beguiled by Mr. Hood's wonders, does not stop to consider the consequences. All right, so I'll also notice that this book is packed full of really interesting and dark illustrations. This one's weird. I wonder what that's about. I don't know if you can quite see it, but I notice his rear end has a face looking back. It's quite odd. Also here, this is taken from the graphic novel of the mentor text. That's from the title page. I think that's an interesting looking house. So the first thing you're going to do is orientate yourself, taking a look at what you might expect when you are reading. The second thing I want you to do is keep track of what you're reading through a story map. A story map, you're just going to need to take a big sheet of paper or small sheets of paper and put them together. And after I read a section of the book, I record a visual and a phrase, a sentence, something to help me remember what happened in that section. I'm only going to do the most important parts. I'm not going to do the whole thing. This is not intended to be super time-consuming. You can make it time-consuming because I know you guys are wonderful artists and illustrators. But the idea is to help you remember the key ideas in the story. Okay? So, first of all, you're going to get your head ready. The first thing you're going to do is look through the book and think about it. The second thing is you're going to start in on a story map. All right? I'm going to be modeling a story map for the mentor text, The Thief of Always. The second thing you're going to pay attention to is the setting. I want you to pay really close attention to when, where is this book happening. All right? So a lot of times in fantasy, the setting takes on its own personality. All right? Most definitely in The Thief of Always, the setting is really important. And I will tell you, this is part of the setting. It's really critical to the story. A lot of times that's the case in fantasy. So right off the bat, I want you to pay close attention to what it looks like, what it feels like. Put yourself in that position. What would it be like if you were there? Also, think about, when was this happening? Is this happening in the present, in the past, in the future? Could this happen in our reality? One reason why fantasy books are fantasy is because there is a magical element to it. Sometimes it can be like magic, It could also be personification, like talking animals, talking objects. But there is something mystical, something magical, something that just couldn't quite happen in our reality. So, I want you to pay close attention to the setting. I am going to have Audibles read to us because they do a fantastic job, but I'm going to be stopping and I'm going to be showing you images of the book as we are going through and pausing and pointing things out to you. All right? All right, let's get started.
Chapter 1. Harvey, Half Devoured. The great gray beast February had eaten Harvey Swick alive. Here he was, buried in the belly of that smothering month, wondering if he would ever find his way out through the cold coils that lay between here and Easter. He didn't think much of his chances. More than likely he'd become so bored as the hours crawled by that one day he'd simply forget to breathe. Then maybe people would get to wondering why such a fine young lad had perished in his prime. It would become a celebrated mystery, which wouldn't be solved until some great detective decided to recreate a day in Harvey's life. Then, and only then, would the grim truth be discovered. The detective would first follow Harvey's route to school every morning, trekking through the dismal streets. Then he'd sit at Harvey's desk and listen to the pitiful drone of the history teacher and the science teacher, and wonder how the heroic boy had managed to keep his eyes open. And finally, as the wasted day dwindled to dusk, he traced the homeward trek. And as he set foot on the step from which he had departed that morning, and people asked him, as they would, why such a sweet soul as Harvey had died, he would shake his head and say, "It's very simple." "Oh," the curious crowd would say, "do tell." And brushing away a tear, the detective would reply, "Harvey Swick was eaten by the great gray beast February." It was a monstrous month, that was for sure. A dire and dreary month. The pleasures of Christmas, both sharp and sweet, were already dimming in Harvey's memory, and the promise of summer was so remote as to be mythical. There'd be a spring break, of course, but how far off was that? 5 weeks? 6? Mathematics wasn't his strong point, so he didn't irritate himself further by attempting and failing to calculate the days. He simply knew that long before the sun came to save him, he would have withered away in the belly of the beast. "You shouldn't waste your time sitting up here," his mom said when she came in, and found him watching the raindrops chase each other down the glass of his bedroom window. "I've got nothing better to do," Harvey said, without looking around. "Well then, you can make yourself useful," his mom said. Harvey shuddered. Useful? That was another word for hard labor. He sprang up, marshaling his excuses. He hadn't done this, he hadn't done that. But it was too late. "You can start by tidying up this room," his mom said. "But don't sit wishing the days away, honey. Life's too short. But that's a good boy." And with that, she left him to it. Muttering to himself, he stared around the room. It wasn't even untidy. There were 1 or 2 games scattered around, a couple of drawers open, a few clothes hanging out. It looked just fine. "I am 10, he said to himself. Having no brothers and sisters, he talked to himself a good deal. "I mean, it's not like I'm a kid. I don't have to tidy up just because she says so. It's boring." He wasn't just muttering now, he was talking out loud. I want to. He went to the mirror and quizzed it. "What do I want?" The straw-haired, snub-nosed, brown-eyed boy he saw before him shook his head. "I don't know what I want," he said. "I just know I'll die if I don't have some fun. I will. I'll die." As he spoke, the window rattled. A gust of wind blew hard against it. Then a second, then a third, and even though Harvey didn't remember the window being so much as an inch ajar, it was suddenly thrown open. Cold rain spattered his face. Half closing his eyes, he crossed to the window and fumbled to slam it, making sure that the latch was in place this time. The wind had started his lamp moving, and when he turned back, The whole room seemed to be swinging around. One moment the light was blazing in his eyes, the next it was flooding the opposite wall. But in between the blaze and the flood, it lit the middle of his room, and standing there, shaking the rain off his hat, was a stranger. He looked harmless enough. He was no more than 6 inches taller than Harvey, his frame scrawny, his skin distinctly yellowish in color. He was wearing a fancy suit, a pair of spectacles, and a lavish smile. "Who are you?" Harvey demanded, wondering how he could get past this interloper to the door. "Don't be nervous," the man replied, teasing off one of his suede gloves, taking Harvey's hand and shaking it. "My name's Rictus. You are Harvey Swick, aren't you?" "Yes." "I thought for a moment I'd got the wrong house." Harvey couldn't take his eyes off Rictus's grin. It was wide enough to shame a shark, with 2 perfect rows of gleaming teeth. Rictus took off his spectacles, pulled a handkerchief from the pocket of his waterlogged jacket, then started to mop off the raindrops. Either he or the handkerchief gave off an odor that was far from fragrant. The smell, in truth, was flatulent. "You've got questions, I can see that," Rictus said to Harvey. "Yeah." "Ask away. I've got nothing to hide." "Well, how did you get in, for one thing?" "Through the window, of course." "It's a long way up from the street." "Not if you're flying." "Flying?"
"Of course. How else was I going to get around on a foul night like this? It was either that or a rowboat. We short folk gotta watch out when it's raining this hard. One wrong step and you're swimming."
He peered at Harvey quizzically.
"Do you swim?"
"In the summer, sometimes," Harvey replied, wanting to get back to the business of flying. But Rictus took the conversation in another direction entirely.
"On nights like this," he said, "doesn't it seem like there'll never be another summer?"
"It sure does," said Harvey.
"You know, I heard you sighing a mile off, and I said to myself, there's a kid who needs a vacation."
He consulted his watch.
"If you've got the time, that is."
"The time?"
"For a trip, boy, for a trip. You need an adventure, young Swick, somewhere out of this world."
"How'd you hear me sighing when you were a mile away?" Harvey wanted to know.
"Why should you care? I heard you, that's all that matters."
"Is it magic of some kind?"
"Maybe."
"Why won't you tell me?" Rictus gave Harvey a beady stare.
"I think you're too inquisitive for your own good, that's why,"
he said, his smile decaying a little.
"If you don't want help, that's fine by me."
He made a move toward the window. The wind was still gusting against the glass, as though eager to come back in and carry its passenger away. "Wait," Harvey said.
"For what?"
"I'm sorry. I won't ask any more questions." Rictus halted, his hand on the latch.
"No more questions, eh?"
"I promise," said Harvey. "I told you, I'm sorry."
"So you did, so you did."
Rictus peered out at the rain.
"I know a place where the days are always sunny," he said, "and the nights are full of wonders."
"Could you take me there?"
"We said no questions, boy. We agreed."
"Oh, yeah, I'm sorry."
Being a forgiving sort, I'll forget you spoke. And I'll tell you this. If you want me to inquire on your behalf, I'll see if they've got room for another guest."
"I'd like that."
"I'm not guaranteeing anything," Rictus said, opening the latch.
"I understand." The wind gusted suddenly and blew the window wide. The light began to swing wildly.
"Watch for me,"
Rictus yelled above the din of rain and wind. Harvey started to ask him if he'd be coming back soon, but stopped himself in the nick of time.
"No questions, boy," Rictus said.
And as he spoke, the wind seemed to fill up his coat. It rose around him like a black balloon, and he was suddenly swept out over the windowsill.
"Questions rot the mind," he hollered as he went. "Keep your mouth shut, and we'll see what comes your way."
And with that, the wind carried him off. the balloon of his coat rising like a black moon against the rainy sky.
All right, hey guys, that was chapter 1. Let's talk about it briefly. First of all, we have been introduced to Harvey Swick, and we know that Harvey Swick is a 10-year-old boy who seems to be at home. He doesn't seem to be super excited about anything. It appears to be the month of February because we start off with the amazing lines that the month of February, it feels as though it has swallowed him. So in that personification, we get a sense of the setting. We know that when it's happening probably is February. We also know that being inside of Harvey's head seems to be kind of a sad place, perhaps. Maybe really bored. Maybe he's very unstimulated, very bored. And so if we think about him psychologically and what it's like to be in his space, in his mind, we can see that it's not necessarily the happiest place right now. So when you are starting to read your book, I want you to think about the setting in terms of when, where, and then psychologically. That means, what is it like to be in your character's head? If you think about what is it like to live during a pandemic, you know when it's happening, you know where it's happening, but then what is it like? What does it feel like to be living in that moment? That will tell you the psychology that you are experiencing right now, and then I want you to transfer that kind of understanding and think about your characters. What is it like to be in their heads right now? Okay? All right, last thing is we're going to talk about the 3 different types of settings that you're going to find in fantasy. These are typical, and so the first one, I included a clip of The Hobbit. In The Hobbit, that's an example of a medieval setting. Medieval refers to a time period that happened a very long time ago. Oftentimes in these medieval settings, they will reference dragons, swords, castles, wizards, things like that. So the medieval setting is the first example. The second is the futuristic setting. So I included the beginning clips of the Hunger Games. You will notice as when you are watching it that it feels different. Sometimes it feels very troubled in these futuristic settings. They oftentimes start out trying to make things better, and then you notice that it maybe isn't. The third setting is a modern day setting. You start out and things are normal. It seems like a realistic story until all of a sudden something magical or mystical happens. And so that's why we really have to pay close attention when we're reading these complex texts, because very quickly Rictus swung into the room, and we didn't have a ton of time to discern, is he real? Is he fake? What's happening here? So we want to pay close attention to the setting. So what I want you to think about as you are starting your series is, what kind of setting is it? Is it medieval with dragons, swords, castles, wizards? Is it futuristic? Is it set in the future with different technology, different perspectives? Or is it set in modern day and then magical, mystical things start to come into play? Okay.
Mom, come on. I don't want to do this. We got to do this book. And we need to fill it up with stickers.
All right. I'm almost done. Run along. All right, so just a couple more things. Harry Potter was the example in the movie clip of modern day and then magical things happen. If you think about Hogwarts doesn't happen for a little while. Harry Potter starts off living in his aunt and uncle's home, and it just seems like he's in a terrible living situation, but a realistic fiction book until all of a sudden magical things start to happen. So that would be an example of that. When we were reading The Thief of Always, that is an example also of modern day, and then magical things happen. Harvey Swick started off like any other 10-year-old kid story could start off with until Rictus came in. And now we're not sure what's actually happening. Is this magical? what is happening. So I want you to pay close attention to that. Make sure you are not reading ahead for your book club. And cheerio, I look forward to chapter 2 coming soon. Bye-bye.